Welcome back, everyone. This is Season 1, Episode 2 of the Joe Sinister podcast, where we feature stories from Reddit's scariest subreddits and authors. This episode, we feature 4 stories for you tonight from 4 authors. Our first story is written by Nom 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 Nation.
So hit the lights, sit back, and enjoy the sinister feeling that creeps into your soul.
The way that a thought can nest its way into our mind is curious to think about. The way it can become so deeply ingrained in oneself that it becomes a very part of them, a part of who they are as a person. It tugs on the very neurons of the brain as if they are the strings of a puppet or the buttons of a machine. Thoughts can consume you if you let them. Just try not to think about it. It is this very concept that consumed my best friend. A thought so impalpable that she spent her days trying to understand it, trying to reason with it, and letting it merge with her life. Maya ran the Twisted Bloom, a quaint, quiet florist. She took over after her sister Brooke went missing a few years ago. She had helped out here and there whilst Brooke had been around, so she was familiar with the logistics of the place. I myself had also helped here and there, both under Brooke's ownership and Maya's. But last month, as I was unloading a box of flowers and bringing them inside, Maya said something strange. She still whispers to me through the petals. In hindsight, this is where everything began. But at the time, it was a beautiful thought. Perhaps Brooke really was still watching over us, using her passion of nature as the way through. We all miss her, I smiled gently as I spoke. I also feel closer to her when I'm around the flowers. It's like she's still here. She is. Maya spoke this time not with the beauty of a metaphor or the comfort of a belief. She spoke with certainty, as though she had spoken to Brooke. She seemed dismissive of my statement, almost offended and angry that I implied it to be comforting. I didn't speak further, I just nodded and continued helping. She had lost her sister. I had no reason to think her words were anything more than grief and finding her own comfort. Or maybe I just don't want to blame myself for not noticing. Before taking over the Twisted Bloom, Maya had studied chemistry. She wanted to be a pharmaceutical researcher, experimenting and studying drugs to create new breakthroughs in the medical field. I always envied her decisiveness of job choice. I always found it so difficult to decide what I wanted to do with my life, or who I wanted to be. I always told myself as adulthood came around, I'd realize the answer. But nobody tells you that adulthood doesn't just happen one day. It's gradual. The epiphany moment never came, and even as an adult, I still have no idea where I want to go with my life. I think Maya felt that continuing the florist was essential, and she gave up on her chosen career. She never specifically said it, but I know it must have been hard for her, to not only lose her sister, but to lose everything she had planned. But running that place had brought her comfort in continuing what Brooke had started, and I couldn't fault her for that. Brooke loved nature, and to let her love dissipate even after she had left, this world just felt wrong for Maya. One way that Maya found to combine her interests with the Twisted Bloom was by using chemistry to help the environment. A few years ago, before Brooke went missing, she had been developing a solution that sped up decomposition and provided nutrients for plant life. She soaked a piece of paper in it and threw some seeds on top. The following morning, the paper was unrecognizable, as a rectangle of flowers bloomed in its place. It was beautiful. Brooke found it so exciting. A few weeks ago, Maya told me she was working on the solution more. I don't want it to be painful, she spoke solemnly. There was an issue with the previous version. Curiously, I asked, plants feel pain? All living things feel. I didn't like the way she was speaking. Something about it just felt off. She sounded sorry and remorseful. She's never been the spiritual type, so hearing her say something like this was very out of character. Still though, I only saw it as her emotions taking control. I had no reason to be suspicious. As the weeks went on, she said more and more ominous things, always about Brooke, or flowers, or both. I knew something was really wrong when she closed the Twisted Bloom last week. Even odder is that she didn't close it to focus on anything new. She stayed in the shop, working on her solution and staring at the plants. Sometimes I'd even catch her talking to them. "You look beautiful, sister." I tried to talk to her about it, but she was always so dismissive. She stopped letting me inside, claiming I was making Brooke uncomfortable. Yesterday, she stopped responding to text or calls. Today, I dropped by the Twisted Bloom and I couldn't even see her through the window. Worried about her health, I broke the window around the back. Some of the shards of glass sliced my hand, but I was too focused to pay attention. I climbed through. "Maya!" I yelled through the store. There were clear signs of life, as the lights were on and her equipment was still on in the back room. Yet no reply shouted back. "Maya, please answer me." I wanted a reply, though did not expect one. My heart pounded loudly, almost too loud to even hear a response if I did get one. I searched around the store. Everything looked normal. The plants were all taken care of. Music gently played from the radio on the counter. I walked over to turn it off. Despite how quiet the music was, I still wanted absolute silence while I searched. Yet, as the silence began, I noticed a pile of flowers behind the counter. Where Maya usually stood to serve customers was now covered in nature. Beautiful, yet misplaced. Every petal and stem looked healthy and all, but their location. Why were they on the floor? As I knelt down to get a closer look, I noticed that each flower seemed to twist, weave, and tangle into the shape of a person laying down. The face resembled Maya, a single stem showing her smile, with many more intricately woven to shape each individual feature of her appearance. It looked like a sculpture, an art piece. I really wanted it to be. "Maya!" I shouted into the air that now seemed thick. "When did you make this?" I put a hand on the counter to steady myself as I stood back up, feeling a burning sensation in my open wound. Glancing over showed the cause. A tipped-over bottle of Maya's invention. Liquid spread over the counter. Liquid that now was in my blood. She didn't manage to fix the pain problem. I don't know where else to post this, but I live on a native reserve called Agwinsasni. I don't know if it's well known or not, but a quick Google search will tell you the basics, so let's get into this. I, 18 female, once went out on the boat with my father, his sister, her kids, and their father in the St. Lawrence River. There's, and I guess you could call it an urban legend, about the seaweed at the bottom of the river. It's said that bad men would be dragged under that disguised themselves as the rest of the weeds. And while I was on this outing, I jumped into the river alone. I was probably somewhere between 7 and 10. It wasn't uncommon for me to swim alone. When I jumped, I remember looking down at the bottom of the river, and the weeds were about 50 or so feet below me, pretty far in a river. As I swam back up to the surface of the water, I felt something grab onto my leg. I looked down and it was one of the weeds, like just a strand around my right ankle, and I remember the light fading away. And then I blacked out. When I came to, my uncle was giving me CPR while my father was crying in his sister's arms. He was scared of losing me as we lost my older sister when I was 3. That's all I really remember of that day. No one talks about the trauma because it's considered to be all in our heads. Another thing that didn't happen to me, but it happened to one of my uncles. He was out on a sea-doo in the rain, and he saw a literal giant snakehead. And this thing was impossibly huge, bigger than a car. Needless to say, I never swam alone anymore, and we don't go on the river in the rain. The next story we have for you is called Am I a Bad Person for Abandoning My Friend in the Woods? Written by Jam Franz. Okay, before you tell me yes, of course I am. I feel like I should give you some background of what happened before I ran from that place, not even bothering to look back. So please, just hear my side of the story, although it's not like she could tell you hers. My friend Sadie was really into urban exploration, and I'm really into hiking. So when she told me she heard from a coworker about this old building deep in the woods, and swore it was absolutely amazing, and you have to see it, well, it sounded like a perfect trip for us. I was patient and helped guide her as we hiked up steep hills, navigated narrow ledges, and took shortcuts through the streams. The same way she was patient with me when I took only one look at the exterior of the abandoned church before firmly declaring, nope. The building, or at least where it stood, had been visible even in the far distance because it was a dark patch amongst the color of the fall foliage. At the time, I felt something sinister about it. Tall trees had grown up from inside the church itself since there was no roof to contain them. Judging by their height, probably many decades ago, they were blackened as if by rot, leafless and seemingly dead, standing in the stark contrast to those around them. The younger trees had contorted themselves to reach sunlight through the paneless windows, as if trying to escape the same fate. I've heard that some places that were deserted by humans describing as being reclaimed by nature, but nature clearly wanted nothing to do with this place. Other than the trees emerging from it, the rest of the woods seemed to reject it entirely. Dead grass flanked the outside, and despite the mass of vines creeping up from the trees we had walked by on our way here, none had so much as touched the stone walls of the church. It was as if they knew to leave it well alone. From the moment I saw the exterior, I had second thoughts, but Sadie wasn't even remotely dissuaded. She only managed to convince me to go in there after I pointed out what looked like to be bones of a small animal near the bottom of the rotting wood stairs, and she lightly said, "I'd hate to be outside with whatever did that." Even then, I had stared up at the building for long after she had entered, before I worked up the nerve to actually go inside. From the moment I passed through the threshold, I felt a chill, despite my coat having been too warm on me just moments before. The smell of damp leaves and soil mixed with decay hit me as I walked in and was almost unbearable. Something crunched hard under my boot that had been hidden under the leaves, more small and brittle bones from the look of it. I thought I could see bits of large ones tucked away, swept under the pews. The ill-looking trees had grown up around the rotting remains of wooden pews, which had forced them into perfectly spaced parallel rows. It made me uneasy, made the scene all the more disorienting. I hovered near the entry, afraid to stray too far from the light sweeping in through the door. Despite no roof to block it out, far too little sunlight made it into the building for my liking. I hovered near the entry, afraid to stray too far from the light sweeping in through the door. Despite no roof to block it out, far too little sunlight made it into the building for my liking. I walked around and observed the splintered pews, some with faded and warped hymnals lying open and waterlogged from the recent rain, and was surprised that the once beautiful books were simply left there to ruin. It almost looked as if everyone walked out during what was to be the church's final service and never returned. I didn't want to be alone and called out for Sadie. The sound of dead branches breaking underfoot greeted me off to the side, so I began to head towards the direction until I heard her voice call out to me from straight ahead. I took one last uncomfortable look towards where I heard something moving. I thought I saw a fleeting glimpse of someone standing amongst the trees, but when I looked again, they were gone. That was more than enough encouragement for me to speed up as I broke into a little run towards the sound of her voice, continuing through the unnaturally spaced trees. When I called out to her again, she didn't answer. I heard a humming sound instead, and walked towards it instinctively. I eventually made it to the front, but there was no sign of her. The humming was louder now. I was closer. Where an altar once stood, there was instead a jagged and deep-looking pit. I walked around it, careful not to fall in. The air rising up from it was cold, colder than the rest of the church, and somehow managed to smell even worse than the rest of the building too. I tried not to get too close, but from what I could see, it was noticeably deep. I couldn't see the bottom. I realized that the humming I heard was the sound of an endless swarm of flies circling around, coming within the deep hole itself, more than I'd ever seen at one time before. I froze when I spotted her glasses on the ground several feet away. One thick lens had popped out and the other side was deeply cracked beyond repair. "Sadie!" I shouted, panicked. For a long moment the buzzing flies was my only response, so when she finally spoke, I nearly jumped.
"I'm here. We're all here. Never left,"
she whispered behind me. Her voice echoed, sounded hoarse, as if with disuse. She was crawling out of that awful hole, scratching at the dark, hardened dirt along the edges. I immediately ran to her so I could help her the rest of the way out, even though she seemed to struggle against me and almost pull me down there with her. She was dirty, her black hair wet with blood and matted around her head. She was dismissive as I fussed about her injuries, like the concerning gash on the back of her head that trickled bright red blood around the neck and her coat, and how part of one eyelid was completely torn through. She had scratches all over her face, with the deepest of gashes concentrated around her eyes. I tried handing her what remained of her glasses, knowing how nearsighted she was and hoping the one lens I was able to sort of put back in would help, but she pushed me away.
"Oh, I don't need those anymore."
She giggled.
"What was down there?"
I whispered.
"I can show you."
She replied with a smile.
"I didn't want to see it at first, but they helped me."
I laughed nervously, unsure of what to say. I had wondered at the time if she had been conscious. I realized that she'd positioned herself so that she stood in front of me, with the pit to my back and my heels less than a foot away from the jagged edge. I could smell it before I heard the sound of something wet, smooth, arising from the pit as it brushed against the packed dirt. I could hear its movement behind me.
"Iris, please look,"
she pleaded while the blood from her cuts and eyelids dripped down her face. I could see something was casting a shadow on her in the limited light that seeped from the door and between the trees. She stared up at me and looked positively overjoyed. The shadowy details I could make out had for some reason terrified me, so I certainly had no interest in looking at it straight on. But despite me having both height and weight on my side, she tackled me to the ground easily after only a few stumbled steps. She scratched at me, with dirty, sharp, raggedy nails, eyes wild, desperate trying to pry my eyes open. I could hear it coming closer, gliding over the wet leaves. I squeezed my eyes shut so hard it hurt, with a particularly violent yank, and while digging into my fragile and thin skin under my eyes, she finally succeeded. Dazed, I looked at her and saw her staring upwards reverently, her eyes now leaking a mixture of tears and blood. Subconsciously, my gaze followed hers. When I saw it, I expected a change, something terrible beyond words, especially after I had felt it behind me, smelled the scent of fetid meat mixed up with damp earth. But it was beautiful. It had been here as long as the rivers, craggy rocks, and rolling hills themselves. I realized how foolish I had been to be afraid. I think you'll agree once you see it. I tried not to be too resentful that Sadie got to stay, that she got to become an unending part of the congregation under the ground, while I had to leave, while I had to take off running towards the car and head home alone. In fact, I believe she's incredibly lucky to be able to stay, while I was told that someone needed to go help others see before I could return. I'm not the bad person for leaving her there, am I? Our final story is called My Wife Found God. After her miscarriage, my wife started praying a lot, which was odd. As far as I knew, she didn't even believe in God. Every night, she would kneel at the foot of our bed, always in the same place, praying. I gave her time and space to heal. I waited months to even bring up trying again. We both wanted a kid. I don't want another kid, she said. I want our son back. Son? We never learned the gender. How did she know it was a boy? Slowly, she started praying more, longer. It wasn't just before bed anymore. She'd kneel at the bed incessantly whispering to herself. I'd finish a movie by myself and realize she'd been praying the whole time. 2 hours? Like I said, this wasn't like her. I asked why she'd been praying so much. I'm talking to our son. Honey, our son passed. I know that. I'm not crazy. I'm talking to him on the other side. Other side? He's safe over there. The shepherd is taking care of him. I think you might want to talk to someone. Professionally, this doesn't seem healthy. She just laughed it off. Sometime after that, she stopped going to work. I had to beg her to take breaks just so she would eat. She would finally wake up, pray until she passed out, wake up and pray again. She was withering away. I needed to help her. I just couldn't figure out how. On the original due date of our son, she woke me up from the living room couch. It's time, she said. I have to show you. She led me to our bedroom and insisted I pray right at the foot of the bed where she always did. What could it hurt? I kneeled down, shut my eyes, and pressed my hands together. I was transported to a different world, empty and dark. Before me was a shepherd in a white frock with a green cowl. He held a crying infant that he dropped to the ground, laughing.
He's perfect.
The shepherd said.
The perfect body.
A wire around my neck snapped me back to my bedroom. The shepherd said our son can come back, but he needs your body. She pulled the wire tight. Don't struggle. Our son needs an intact body, but your soul can't be in it. She had encased my hands in duct tape while they're pressed together praying. I couldn't grab the wire. The more I fought, the tighter the wire got. Everything went dark, and I returned to the empty plane. I walked over to pick up the crying baby. He had my wife's eyes and my nose. Was this really our son? But if I was here with him, that demon shepherd was with my wife. If you enjoyed those stories, please consider leaving us a like and subscribing, as I upload every Friday. Leave us your thoughts in the comments. and follow us on other social media platforms. If you have any stories that you would like for us to read, send us a chat request on Reddit at VO_Joe and enjoy the spooky season.